Let's introduce a personality. Allah. Right. I wanted to speak last week and then we got distracted. I had said I will introduce the personality of Abu Muslim Al-Khurasani. And who was he? So, learning a bit about him, we'll come across certain other personalities, okay, certain names. And the good thing is, like I mentioned, to kind of map these out, maybe research them in your own time, maybe learn about them, watch stuff on YouTube about them, do different things. um, so in this journey of this character, Abu Muslim Al-Khurasani, there'll be people, you'll hear the names of uh, Marwan ibn Muhammad, or Marwan al-Ja'di, or Marwan al-Himar, the last Umayyad caliph, Abdul Hamid al-Katib, one of the earliest um, um, one of the earliest influences on Arabic Arabic prose, or Arabic. What's a better way to say it? That how almost like sermon, um, like on the he set out the science of how to, which would dictate sermon practice and things like this. We'll get to that. People like that, people like Ibrahim al-Imam, the great grandson of Abdullah ibn Abbas, and the leader of the Abbasids, Umayyads. This is a key term: Bani Umayyah, Bani al-Abbas, the Abbasids. Abu Ja'far al-Mansur, who we've met previously, spoken about in a few stories, especially the story of Abu Dulama. Um, you'll have Abu Abbas al-Safah, who we've spoken about previously as well. So these are some of the names that you'll hear being kind of bounced around, and you may want to explore them at your own leisure. But coming back to this individual, Abu Muslim al-Khurasani is an incredibly fascinating individual. Why? Because he, in many ways, is a nobody, yet while simultaneously being everybody when it came to an entire imperial change. Okay, so a shift. So you have, right, to understand this, we're going to have to pause Abu Muslim al-Khurasani. He himself, before we pause him, just giving a brief introduction to him. He is somebody who is of Persian descent. Some people say whether his parents became Muslim or not is discussed, but he himself, according to certain people, ends up as a slave, a small boy. He's kind of brought, freed, and he encounters, as a young man, apparently his Persian ancestors, may have been of kind of imperial aristocracy. So they may have been people of great lineage within the Persian kind of Sassanid empires, allegedly. Obviously, it's difficult to ascertain these things when empires have collapsed and some people claim things. Now, you don't know whether it was real or not. But that's this lad who grows up quite destitute, incredibly formidable in character, has something very just striking about his personality, very charming, charismatic. He's incredibly eloquent in Farsi, but also learns Arabic and is incredibly eloquent in Arabic. And he ends up, from this nobody, not only rubbing shoulders with the elite of Bani al-Abbas, the Abbasid, but arguably the kind of key determinator, the kind of determining factor the kind of the the dagger in the sleeve of the Abbasid gown that enables them to topple the Umayyad dynasty. So this person is a nobody yet everybody. Okay. So this is why he's so fascinating. So okay, let's put him aside. And he's kind of he has this meteoric rise to fame. He just comes out of nowhere and suddenly he's this icon, celebrity, and then as he rises, he falls. وتلك الأيام نداولها بين الناس. So let's put him aside. Right. Somebody said, reminds me of myself, Mufti. I sure hope so. I sure hope so. So let's go back to the time of Bani Umayyah. Now, we've already spoken. We've got I've got a whole video on Sulaiman ibn Abdul Malik, and it's definitely worth watching if you haven't watched it. It gives a lot of history in that, what was happening in Bani Umayyah's time, the kind of the downhill trend, and then how Sulaiman tries to push an uphill trend, and after him he puts in place Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, which becomes this kind of twilight phase once again in what was otherwise becoming a very dark legacy for Bani Umayyah. Now, Bani Umayyah are almost they rule, let's say, about arguably no, just no, not they don't make 100 years, but near enough, over 90. So after Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, there's some changes. You do go through, you'll go through Yazid, and then there'll be some. This is not the first Yazid. This is a late Yazid, and we go through them in that video. However, they eventually end up on this person known as Marwan ibn Muhammad. Now he's popularly known as they call him Marwan al-Himar, Marwan the donkey, or Marwan al-Ja'di. The reason they call him Ja'di is because of he had this teacher that he was inspired by, Ja'ad, that they refer him to. And ironically, they don't, when they call him Marwan al-Himar, and I must say, I too was guilty of this, I assumed it's as an insult, but it's actually as an accolade, it's actually as an element of praise. Just goes to show when people think that you can read into history. So this must be the biggest gaslighting. They got a chart. No, you thought when we're calling you a donkey, we were insulting you. Yeah, we were praising you. We weren't saying donkey, we were saying donkey. So it's true that they say that he's called donkey as a praise because of his kind of tenacity to go on. So this, what era is this? This is the years we're talking, maybe the final like 125 Hijri, that kind of time. So it's almost, we're talking over 115 years after the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So it's in the time that people like Imam Abu Hanifa are around. It's in the time Imam Malik is around. It's in that kind of era of the Tabi'een. So Marwan, known as Marwan al-Himar, he is called this because there's a saying in Arabic as well that asbaru min himar, that somebody's more patient than a donkey. Because a donkey, I don't know if you've seen in certain countries where they utilize donkeys, they actually load them with quite a load, and they stack them, make them carry quite a burden. I've seen it in villages, like they'll make them carry bricks and carry all this, and the donkey just trods along. Just occasionally just chucks everything over. It's not that, but it has this this kind of tenacity to just keep trotting along. And they say that was why they were calling. That's why they were calling him a donkey. Either that was true or this was like the biggest gaslighting event of. They go, that wasn't an insult. That was an accolade. Yeah. Jahil doesn't even understand the difference between praise and. So that's like calling somebody a dog and then saying, no, I meant you're like a true best friend to man. That's what I meant. You know, they say a dog is a man's best friend. But anyway, I'm not making this up. This is in the books. They say that, by the way, himar is not an insult to Marwan. It's actually an accolade. It's a praise for him because he would this meant he had the tenacity to keep going. So anyway, Marwan, before he becomes caliph, he's in charge of these areas like Armenia and some of the kind of Balkan regions and stuff like this. So he's had his expertise in war. But there is a huge restlessness that is rising against Bani Umayyah. And we've spoken of this previously. People were upset. And there was a lot of factions that were conspiring against them, especially the main strength against them was the Shia. Okay, because the kind of family of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam being persecuted, this narrative was the strongest narrative. And people were fed up anyway. It's not just sometimes you need something to believe in, but people also give you an excuse because Bani Umayyah weren't, they were, they were who they were. It's very obvious they weren't that considerate of people. There was heavy taxes at times. There were confiscations. There were all these kind of things going on. So the kind of Shia movement is rising, and it seems to garner and harness an ear in the far east of the Muslim world. So places like Khurasan, which is modern day Afghanistan, and maybe parts of that region going north, maybe today some parts of that kind of Western Central Asia being part of it. But this Khurasan region, they seem to have a soft spot for the Shia kind of movement. And at the forefront of the Shia movement were obviously you had the Alawiyyin, people who were claiming that being, let's say, the descendants of Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anh. But you also had people just generally from Bani Hashim, the greater clan. And amongst them, you had people that would be the offspring of Abdullah ibn Abbas, and Abbas, the uncle of the Prophet, which is all the clan of Hashim. And remember, all of Hashim, including Sayyidina Ali, they are united by that cause because they're all ultimately one blood. So to them, Bani Umayyah are the arch rivals. So you start to see a strategic elevation, a rise in the Abbasids amongst this. So let's say all of these are one group, and those from Abbas seem to have more charming characters and personalities. So you have this personality, Ibrahim ibn Muhammad. Now, they call him Ibrahim al-Imam. He is somebody that starts calling towards this da'wah and calling people, and he's very charming, very kind of has that mysterious element to him. So Bani Umayyah imprison him. They catch him. He's locked up in prison. But in that day and age, the prisons were slightly different. So people would allow people to come visit prisoners. It wasn't the kind of way today we see prisons. They're a lot more institutionalized. And on a separate discussion, one could speak about Foucault. the Foucauldian analysis of prisons and the institutionalization of modernity. But prisons in that day and age were quite like, you were locked up, the person was locked up, they were in this thing, but people could come and go, and they could bring them food, and they could do stuff, and they could even spend like a whole day there. They could spend several days with them. Like, people didn't actually care. It wasn't like, oh, who are you or what. They were just like, weren't bothered, indifferent to it. So what happens is, somebody gives Abu Muslim Al-Khurasani, they give him some things to take to Ibrahim al-Imam, like, as in, like, a just use him as a gopher, go for this, go for that. He's this kind of young boy. He's not very he's just, he had been a former slave and stuff. And so Ibrahim al-Imam sees something special in him, and he asks him, what's your name? And then there's differences, that his name was something else before, and people use different names. What Ibrahim al-Imam says to him is that he takes a liking to him, and he renames him. He says that he gives him this name, Abu Muslim, that this is who you are. And so, okay, and he can see that there's this clear kind of dynamic, like a bond, like this, like almost a guide, a sheikh, and a disciple, or almost like a senior warrior kind of spirit, and you've got this disciple. This kind of bond gets created because this Abu Muslim he's bringing him food every other day, and he's spending time there. He ends up talking to him, and Ibrahim al-Imam can see this guy is he has a charm to him and a charisma. And he's obviously he's got a strong stature. He's physically has this presence. He's young, but he has this presence. And as the days turn into months, which turn into 1 or 2 years, that there is this bond going on. The da'wah of the, let's say, the Abbasids, which is actually the da'wah of the Hashemiyin, the Shia, it is growing stronger and stronger day by day in the Khurasan region. So people ask Ibrahim al-Imam that, look, we need to send someone, we need to capitalize on it. We need to send someone that can take charge and kind of mobilize, get armies together. And, we have to, like, it's ripe. We need to do something. So he says, you're right. And they asking him, who will you nominate? Because they've got all these figures. They've got, these great people from Abbasids and Hashmin and Alawin. And he says, this young lad here, Abu Muslim, says, I send him in charge. And, it's incredibly fascinating. In psychology, you have something known as the Pygmalion effect, that maybe sometimes the expectation of excellence from someone, it impacts and influences the performance of excellence in the observed. So if a coach, let's say a football coach or any sports coach, kind of just sees, for some reason, has the belief of excellence in a particular young player, often it happens that player rises to that excellence to match the expectation. And this is called the Pygmalion effect. And it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. And so Abu Muslim takes this up, and he goes, and first of all, there's some, there's battles, and he's this relentless. People are shocked how ruthless this person is. And he just suddenly rises to fame. And the people of the region, actually, once he locks control of Khurasan, they love him. They absolutely love him. And maybe this was, some people say maybe it's because he was Persian and he could speak Farsi. See, a lot of those people spoke back then, they spoke Farsi. And people say he was eloquent in Farsi. And some people say maybe because he he alleged to have been from the legacy of the Kisras. Like he claimed his forefathers were the great Sassanid rulers, and maybe that struck awe in the hearts of these Khurasaniin and people. And maybe, I mean, or maybe it was just his stature, maybe it was the fact that he was ruthless in his military campaigns. And he would, where he would go to, he would crush any rebellion. And this is why he became such a renowned figure. So what happens, the key people of the Abbasid movement, because remember, this is all the Shia movement, but the Abbasids seem to be they seem to be at the vanguard, at the front of it, okay, taking lead in it. So he starts to rub shoulders with the top people that are there. Like, he already knows Ibrahim al-Imam, like Abu al-Abbas al-Safah, and other people. These are all, he's like, as if he's one of them. And do you know, when he's going, Ibrahim al-Imam says to him, now this is interesting. He says to him, now speaking about that prophecy, he says to him, he says, Abu Muslim, he says, Anta minna ahlul bayt. And in many ways reenacting that scene where the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is saying this to Salman al-Farsi, that you are from us, one of our household, like you to us are real family. And this is then celebrated, and you can imagine what it does to, how it boosts the spirit of this, who's very young, by the way, at this time he's just in his 20s, and he's doing all these expeditions, and these stories are going wild that Ibrahim al-Imam has called him like from us, Ahlul Bayt, and so all this starts to happen. He locks Khurasan. Meanwhile, Ibrahim al-Imam kind of passes away. People say that he's killed by the Umayyads, and there's more turbulence going right throughout the Umayyad state. So what happens is, at the year 131 Hijri, the Abbasids from Khurasan mobilize an army to move down. They think the time is ripe. We should attack and take over whatever we can. Now, Marwan al-Himar, he realizes, and he was like a strong warrior as well. He thinks that, okay, he hears of these armies coming from the east with black flags. Now, this is interesting, by the way, because a lot of the hadith literature that people will sometimes present of these armies coming from the east with black flags at the end of time, it is about the Abbasids. And this is why most of this, it seems very plausible that most of these kind of ahadith are fabricated to serve the Abbasids, because where it mentions these people will come out of the east with black flags, and they will have kunyas in like Abu something, Abu Muslim Al-Khurasani. And these things were there to support that kind of cause, because people really, the power of belief, the script, it's phenomenal. If anybody watches, whether it's going to be a boxing match, or sometimes you get these UFC matches, and they're having that square up, and one of the opponents is he's doing a lot of trash talk. I'm gonna do this. Whoa, you're already dead. I already see. It's like you're gonna see Conor McGregor. He'll be saying things like, "Oh, I already see. Your lips already blue. You're a dead man walking." Blah blah blah. Now, what are they? They're trying to kill the spirit, because once you kill the spirit, the man is just a dead man walking. You see, so the power of belief, it is, one could argue, even more than half the battle. So So these armies are coming out of the east carrying black flags with kunyas like Abu something, okay, like Abu Muslim, Abu al-Abbas as-Safah, Abu Ja'far al-Mansur, all these kind of things. But especially people like Abu Muslim, because he's not even known by his name. He's just known as Abu Muslim. That's his kind of, that's the name that he goes by. He doesn't, but that's really just a kunya, but it's how he's known. So Marwan mobilizes an army and they move forward and they meet at this place. And there's this famous battle, and we can cover that on another day, called the Battle of Zab. But it is the key determining factor that topples the entire Umayyad dynasty and, puts a full stop on a dynastic reign that began since the time of Muawiyah radiallahu an, right down to Marwan. And it ends in that year at this location in the Middle East, northern, I believe, modern day Iraq, but it was called Waq'atu Zab. Now, Marwan goes there, he takes these armies, and he thinks that, you know what, he's got a good chance. And there is a point where, and this battle goes on, and so many casualties. And there is a point where Marwan thinks he's going to win. But, I'll tell you, speaking of beliefs, check this out. Marwan himself was he was mixed race. So his mother was Kurdish. And so she was kind of very like fair skinned, white skinned, and this is why they describe him as very kind of like white looking, white skinned almost. And see, prior to Marwan, the other people, their mothers were usually of Arab descent, or they were free women. They weren't slaves. Marwan's mum, this Kurdish lady, was a slave. And then I think they freed her afterwards, but she was a slave to to his father Muhammad, who wasn't a king, but he was part of the Bani Umayyah. Now, there was this kind of, I don't know not a rumor ain't the word, but this kind of urban myth that the Umayyads had, that if a king, if the son of a female slave was ever to be crowned, the dynasty will be toppled. Allah. So people have these beliefs, you see, and it's interesting because they can become self-fulfilling prophecies. Like in Pakistan, if I recall correctly, there was an urban myth that many years ago when I used to study there, that if Eid coincided with a Jum'ah, it meant that the government will be toppled. So whoever is in power will basically, the seat of power will be toppled. This was like a common, I don't know if people still believe it, but this is, I'm talking almost 2 decades ago. But I remember at the time it was like a widely held belief that if Eid coincides with the Jum'ah, then the seat of power will be taken from whoever has it. Like this was, and people would just say, oh, and it would happen. It's mad how these beliefs then they kind of materialize. So there was this urban myth that if the son of a female slave was to be crowned, then the dynasty will be toppled. So they had this kind of urban myth floating. Now Marwan al-Himar fits that character. So you got to remember he's got this going on in the back of his head as well. And they have this decisive battle plays out. And what we'll do is maybe one day, another day, we'll actually concentrate on the battle as well, because that's interesting. But there is there's like a sidekick to Marwan al-Himar. He's just a literary genius. He's not like a politician. His name was Abdul Hamid al-Khatib, and he's one of the people, one of the most eloquent Arabs of that era. And they say his kind of diction of how to write sermons is how everybody did it after him. So when you want to study kitaba, like today it seems silly, like when we say teaching kitaba, people think, do you mean like teaching how to write? Not how to write in a handwriting sense, but how does one write a book? How does one write a letter? Now this seems dumb when we say it today because it's so common sense, but actually there's a science to it. So for example, I actually recall, like when I was a kid, people obviously now they don't, but when I was a kid, people would write letters, and there was a method to it. Like you would begin a letter by, first of all, you'd explain that, uh, you'd kind of ask, like, okay, greetings, I hope you're well, I hope you'd ask about these people are well, I hope this is well. Then you'd explain, for example, I am well, this has been happening, this. Then you'd have a different paragraph that would get into some of what you're saying. Then you're good. It's like there was an etiquette to how to write, and it's not just letters. How to write books, for example, how do you have an introduction? How do you, first of all, you begin by praising Allah? How long does this praise of Allah go on for? So is it just like Alhamdulillah, or does it go on for an entire paragraph? Many scholars argue that the person who set this style all into motion of how to write the first khutbah in Arabic in a book was Abdul Hamid al-Khatib. That most people following him that wrote their books and everything were were influenced by his methodology, and prior to him nobody used to do it. So it's fascinating that this person, how influential he was so um so when it came to things like this. So he was like a sidekick to Marwan al-Himar, not politically, but almost like a kind of like a counselor friend. Like he was a friend, he was always with him, but he wasn't like Bani Umayyah, and he wasn't from that kind of kingly princely class, but he was just somebody that was so educated, and he was always full of wisdom, and he was great at convincing people. He was a huge, I don't know if you want to say manipulator ain't the right word, but you could imagine a walking talking psychologist back then. They say that he would write to people and he'd have them convinced just like this. Like his words had magic in them. Abdul Hamid al-Khatib. And for many years, he was with Marwan al-Himar, and he's with him in this battle. And in the past, they've been in many battles, and when it's just dragging on, and there's so many casualties, what Abdul Hamid would do is sometimes he would write this epic proposal, which would be a truce, but it would always be very graceful, and it would be so convincing and compelling. So what he does is he says, look, let me write to them. So they say he has this kind of what they wrote on these parchments, yeah, which was like kind of like that leathery thing. And he has so much, he writes so much that they had to put it, like there were these huge sheets of parchment. They had to put it on a camel to take it across to Abu Muslim and to their camp. And this is one of the most eloquent people in the world when it comes to the Arabic language. This Abdul Hamid al-Khatib. Obviously, Abu Muslim is eloquent, but we're talking in a different league, this person, Abdul Hamid al-Khatib. And this was to be read. And remember, you've got the senior kind of commanders and all that would be standing, and they usually listen. And he had a way with the hearts of men. This Abdul Hamid did. So he sends these parchments, huge. They had to take them off. They're like sheets. And it's in like the most mesmerizing Arabic. And this is, when they say Abu Muslim Al-Khurasani, I guess that's when the sword meets the pen. When they took it off, before they could even approach it, Abu Muslim set fire to it. He got some fire. As they took it off the camel, all these sheets of the most hard-hitting, heart-compelling, mind-swaying Arabic that has come as a proposal. They say before they took it off the camel, Abdul Hamid got this torch and he just chucked it on there, set fire to it, and with a sword he cut off one small piece of a little parchment, just a small piece, just like they say, he just chopped that off and let the rest burn. And he's told everybody stand back. And he wrote on that little thing that he cut off, he wrote Maha, that to delete, to remove. He said, Maha Saifu Astar al-Balaghati wantaha alayka liyuth al-ghabi min kulli janibi. Allah. He wrote that and handed it to the person, said, take it back. It said that the sword has torn the lines of eloquence and cast it aside. He said, the Layth means lion. He said, the lions of the jungle have surrounded you on every front. That Maha Saifu Astar al-Balaghati wantaha alayka liyuth al-ghabi min kulli janib. Allah. That, ladies and gentlemen, was the decisive turning point in that battle. It crushed the spirits. Warfare has always been psychological more than physical. That it was just moments now. You can just say it was simply formalities. The Umayyads suffered a crushing defeat after that. Marwan manages to escape, and Abdul Hamid escapes with him. And Marwan does say to Abdul Hamid, you are so eloquent that if you go to them and switch sides, they will definitely honor you because you're just a celebrity. But Abdul Hamid says, it's that perspective, I guess. He says, well, when all of life has gone this way, why switch at this last moment? He says, well, we got to die anyway someday. And then they manage to escape to Egypt, where they both eventually killed. And what happens is there is this huge victory for the Abbasids, and Abul Abbas as-Safah takes lead, and he does. And he's really vicious, and he kills so many people, thousands upon thousands, as he enters Damascus and stuff like this. But you see, what follows is Abu Muslim Al-Khurasani has now attained this kind of princely status. So he starts to hope that maybe I too can become caliph. And then what he starts to do is, when people ask him, he starts to claim that apparently his grandfather, before how he would claim that his ancestors were from the Sassanids, he now starts to say, no, actually his kind of great grandfather was an offspring of Abdullah ibn Abbas. And so he starts to kind of align himself with the Abbasids, and he even tries to propose for who is the aunt of Abu Ja'far al-Mansur. Obviously, they turn it down though. But this is him telling people, I'm like this. And he's really tight with the current ruler, which is Abu Abbas al-Safa. And what happens is there is this incident where he himself wants, obviously he wants more people, Abu Muslim, to like him, and he can start to see this rivalry between him and Abu Ja'far al-Mansur. And there's another you have you within the Abbasids, there's some breakaways, there's a lot of tension that who's going to be the next ruler, and people are kind of like privately competing, and Abu Muslim's kind of competing, and he's getting the masses to kind of like him. He's giving them gifts and he's doing stuff. And remember, we mentioned this before, some of them were very kind of open-hearted and they would do that. So this one year, Abu Muslim asks Abu Safa that, can I this year lead the Hajj? Because you see, the person who leads the Hajj has this seniority. Like, people see him as an imam of the people. So just as Safa is about to agree, Mansur asks, can I lead people this year? So this really gets to, really bothers Abu Muslim. And he even says that, could he find no other year to ask except this year? Does Hajj not happen in other years? And so what happens is, when they set off on the Hajj kind of convoy, Abu Muslim takes a different route and beats Mansur to the Hajj and starts giving all these gifts and winning the hearts and minds of people. People think, oh, wow. So when Abu Mansur got there, he didn't get the audience that he wanted, because Abu Mansur was really tight-fisted. We've covered this before. He's like super tight. He's one of the most tight-fisted. If you remember, people would call him Abu Dawanik, like the person of pennies, because he'd cling to the pennies. And so Abu Muslim has already gone and he's squandered this wealth, and people are like, wow. So when Abu Mansur gets there, Abu Ja'far al-Mansur, very few people receive him, and he asks that, where are the people? And they say, oh yeah, but yeah, they know you're here, but Abu Muslim had come before and he gave all these gifts, and people kind of took him and went home. So you can imagine, this is like really And what happens is, on the way back, the news comes that Safa has passed away. So people give the allegiance automatically to Mansur, Abu Ja'far al-Mansur. So this really annoys Abu Muslim. So he kind of doesn't come back in that part of Iraq, goes somewhere else. And this then leads to this rivalry that is going on between them. So at first, Abu Muslim goes back towards Khurasan side, and he starts gathering some kind of an army, thinking that I will fight Abu Ja'far al-Mansur. And Abu Ja'far, at one point, he kind of sends this threatening letter to him. And it's amazing how, although Abu Muslim is so courageous, but this one threat seems to, they say it hit him hard. That Abu Ja'far said to him that, look, that I swear by God, no matter what corner of the earth you go to hide in, I will seek you out and hunt you. Like, he says, he kind of writes this threat to him. And they say that apparently this threat, for some reason, kind of shook Abu Muslim. And then Abu Ja'far thinks, look, let's do psychological warfare. So he sends some of his people to say that, by the way, we've softened up Mansur, and now he's cool with you. Just come with us. He just wants to patch it up. And he sets up this scenario of betrayal. So let me see if I can bring up some of these things here. So these are, I should have some of the script here somewhere, actually. This is a poem just contributing to what you can see. Somebody said, وَلَوْلَا سَيُوفُ أَبُو مُسْلِمٍ لَعَزَّتْ عَلَى جُهْدِ طلابها. Like this is somebody dissing the Abbasids afterwards, saying that, it was really just Abu Muslim who, if it wasn't for his swords, you guys would never have conquered what you conquered. Now, yeah, let me just get this, show you guys the script. So what happens is, just to to 1 second to bring you up to speed first. So he sends, Abu Ja'far al-Mansur sends these people to win him over. That look, just sweet talk him, tell him that I've changed my mind. He says it's very clear, so you got to don't let him cotton on. And when you guys come here, I'm going to treat him really well, but I'm going to have a code. And when I kind of click my fingers, and then I want you all to march forward with your swords and kind of stab him. Wow. The poison chalice. Allah. So what happens is these people go to Abu Muslim, they meet him, they are some senior figures. They convince him that, Mansur has kind of softened up now, and he wants you to come down. And Abu Muslim says, I don't know, he seems like, I don't know. And they say, what are you talking about? We vouch for you. He says, Chaudhry Saab right here is vouching for you. It's like, cha. Asi aap no entry. What did the person say? He said, but there isn't a sign here, a no entry sign. He said to the copper. He goes, the copper goes, this is a no entry. He goes, but there's no sign here. And the copper goes, Asi aap signer. He goes, I am the no entry sign. So these people are like, look, don't worry about it. We're with you, yaar. We're with you. They're like, look, he's totally cool. He's changed. Yeah, he was a bit unsettled, but now he's cool. So they actually managed to convince him. So Abu Muslim turns up and he comes to the royal court. But when he's coming in, the people, like the guards outside, start kind of manhandling him. And obviously he's on his own. He's not like with an army. And you've got some guard and he's kind of pushing him. He's saying, oh, come this. And obviously this is a huge person. He's like the governor of Khurasan. He's like, by the way, in his lifetime, they say he contributed to the killing of over 500,000 people. I mean, that over 500,000. This is who he is. And at this stage, he's probably, I think, about 27, 28 or something. He's not that old. So he's being all manhandled, and he's obviously finding this insulting. So he comes into Abu Mansur. And so, right, 1 second. Right, okay, that's better. So you've got here that, look, Abu Mansur says to him that he asks him, he says, because first of all, he complains about being manhandled at the door of the palace and stuff. And he says, oh, did they? He says, huh? Acha, I'm going to see to them. Don't worry. I'm going to see to them. How dare they disrespect you? Don't they know who you are? And all this. And check Abu Ja'far al-Mansur. He goes, Abu Ja'far al-Mansur goes, oh, I told them to obviously shake down normal guests, not you. You're not a normal guest. Come on, you're VIP. You're VIP, VIP. So then he says to him, I've got to ask you something. He says that ما حملك على أن تكتب لأبي عبد الله السفاه تنهاه عن الموات أردت أن تعلمنا الدين. You see, in the time of Safa, there was a point where Abu Muslim wrote to him. They were kind of acquiring, there was this acquisition of certain territories, and he felt that was forbidden in Islam. You couldn't do it like this. So he's asking him, were you trying to teach us Islam, by the way? Acha, Islam sikha rahe the aap. It's like, were you trying to? And he says, look, qala innani dhanant anna akhdahu la yahil. He said, I just thought it wasn't permissible in Islam. He says, but when the Amir al-Mu'mineen wrote to me, he says, I realized that they obviously from the household of Abbas must have a better understanding of the deen. He says, look, alimtu annahu wa ahla baytihi ma'adinul ilm, that they are a source of knowledge. Mansoor says, acha, point, huh? Diplomacy. Says, acha, he says, فَلِمَ تَقَدَّمْتَ عَلَيَّ فِي طَرِيقِ الْحَجِّ. He says, what? This is where the old diary is being opened up. He says, remember when we were going to Hajj, why did you beat me to it? He says, قال كرهت اجتماعنا على الماء فيضر ذلك بالناس فتقدمت التماس الرفق. He says, Your Excellency, I didn't want both of our troops to stop at the same water reservoir, because when on these journeys they would stop at set designated reservoirs, and he said that the water would end up being less because there's too many, both of our troops. So I thought, let us go first so you guys can have ease. Diplomacy, diplomacy. قال فلما رجعت. He says, فلما لا رجعت إلي حين أتاك خبر موت أبي العباس. He says, in that case, when you came to learn of the death of Abu al-Abbas, why didn't you come to me? You didn't come back here. You went off. And he says, right. قال كرهت التضييق على الناس في طريق الحج. See, he uses the same excuse. He says, you know what it is? If I came to you and I've got all these troops with me, we're going to congest the streets. And he says, عرفت أننا سنجتمع بالكوفة. He says, I knew we will end up meeting in Kufa anyway, in Iraq. And he says, وَلَيْسَ عَلَيْكَ مِنِّي خِلَافٍ. Like, I'm not going to object to your being the caliph. قال فجارية عبد الله بن علي أردت أن تتخذها لنفسك. حساب كتاب نقطة چيني. This is, prior to the Hajj, there was Abdullah ibn Ali, was another Abbasid. He's the uncle of Abu Ja'far al-Mansur. He had risen in rebellion as well against Mansur. So check this. Mansur had used Abu Muslim to crush him. He had said, can you please deal with him? And he did. He crushed him. And when he crushed him, he took, obviously, one of the concubines. So check this now. He's saying, oh, and you took the concubine of Abdullah ibn Ali for yourself. He says, قال لا ولكن خفت أن تضيع فحملتها في قبة ووكلت بها من يحفظها. He says, no. He says, I thought people might just mistreat her, so I put her in my kind of caravan and just took her for her safety. Political correctness. Political correctness. अच्छा. ثم قال له, he said to him, ألست الكاتب إلي تبدأ بنفسك والكاتب إلي تخطب آمنة بنت علي وتزعم أنك ابن صليط ابن عبد الله ابن عباس هذا كله. So what happens when he's talking? Mansur says to him, look, come close, hold my hand. Bonding, hold my hand. So he's holding, and Mansur has got his hand amongst his hands. And he's not letting go, and he's asking him these questions. He says to him, okay, he says, tell me, when you would write to me, you wouldn't seem to, it seemed to be more a bit egocentric. Tazkiyatun nafs going on, tazkiyatun nafs. And he says that you, and started to claim that you're the son of Salit ibn Abdullah ibn Abbas, like you're from our lineage. And you even proposed Amina bint Ali, his aunt, who's Abbasid, you proposed for her. So what Abu Muslim al-Khurasani does, you see, this is diplomacy, people. So obviously his hand is kind of sandwiched between his hands. Mansur's kind of got them like this, and he's asking these questions, being a bit awkward. So in between, Abu Muslim Al-Khurasani he says, look, I apologize, Your Excellency. And he kisses his hand. Kya baat hai, huh? Kya baat hai? Honestly, a style. It is stylish. Huh? Every time you'd bring something like that up, and his hand is caught there anyway, he'd say, it was my mistake. And then he would just kind of kiss his hand. And so this is going on, right? So then he says to him, he says, ما حملك على مراغمتي ودخولك إلى خراسان. He says, why did you head back towards Khurasan? He says, خفت أن يكون دخلك مني شيء فأردت أن أدخل خراسان وأكتب إليك بعذري. He says, no, look, I thought maybe there was some mistaken bad blood. And I thought, let me go back to Khurasan, then I'll write to you. Now here, there used to be a leader from the Abbasid that was in Khurasan. They would call him Shaykh al-Qawm. His name was Sulaiman ibn Kathir. Abu Muslim had killed him previously. Here he asks him, Lima qatalta Sulaiman ibn Kathir? He says, why did you kill Sulaiman? And he says, وَكَانَ مِن نُقَبَائِنَا وَدُعَاتِنَا قَبْلَ. Because he was like from the classics, and they used to call him Shaykh al-Qawm. He goes, why did you kill him? And he says, you see, this is the point. He gives that, he says, Arada khilafi. He says he started to disobey me. So at this point, Abu Ja'far al-Mansur, and he's holding his hand, remember, he says, Wayhak. He says, damn you. He says, you disobey me. And he says, and people who disobey you, you get killed. But yet, whilst you disobey me, don't you deserve to be killed? And as he does that, he kind of does that click, or some say he kind of taps this pole, or some say it may have been a clap. He does that. And as soon as he does that, the guards come in and unleash. He has these, some say 4 or 5 guards waiting behind these kind of curtains. They come straight in and just strike with their swords at Abu Muslim al-Khurasani, and they continue to strike. They say he obviously fell dead. They sliced him into pieces. And they say, whilst it's happening, Mansur is yelling, well, Mansur yasih, wayhakum adrubu qata Allahu aydiyakum. He's saying, like, hurry, cut him up. He's kind of saying these things, and says, ثم ذبحوه and وقطعوه قطعا ثم ألقي في دجلة. And they threw him in the Tigris River. Now, and you can see this is a part of it as well. And they say that just as he had done that, somebody that was actually close to Abu Muslim and was from the Abbasid had come. He just made it to the palace. He'd heard Abu Muslim had come. And he goes to Mansur. He says, listen, Abu Muslim's coming. I just want you to... He was trying to kind of negotiate. And Abu Ja'far says to him, too late, mate. And he goes, what do you mean? And he just kind of looks at these cut pieces in this kind of leather wrap that they have, which are like human pieces. And he says, that's him. And this, you see, was what lied right there in front of them. That not only this waste of life, but this young man in his late 20s was the determining force that actually crowned the Abbasid dynasty. How he rose just suddenly in his late teens, this meteoric rise, and within a decade kind of collapsed, having left in his wake also 500,000 corpses and the ruins of the Umayyad dynasty, and how he met his own demise. It's such shocking stories that you see really echoing in light of that verse, وَتِلْكَ الْأَيَّامِ نداولها بين الناس. And those days we rotate them amongst people. And how these great mighty people crossed path, whether it was going to be people of literature like Abdul Hamid al-Khatib, whether it was people of dynasty like Marwan al-Himar, and people like Abu Muslim al-Khurasani, and so intelligent as well. They say that after him, people of Khurasan were still they had so much allegiance to him that Mansur tried to first of all fake a letter from his stamp, that people would carry this kind of ring with a seal on it. And they used his ring to feign a letter back to Khurasan saying, look, I'm going to stay here and I'm going to send somebody else. He's going to be in charge. But as soon as it got there, the recipient said, this is fake. And do you know why? Check this out. The genius of Abu Muslim al-Khurasani. He had told his kind of deputies always in Khurasan, you see, whenever he writes a letter and he would seal it, he would only seal half. Like he would, like, let's say this was the letter and you put the seal on, he would only always tilt it. So it would be half a seal. But people wouldn't know this. And it always told them, if a full seal ever comes to you, no, it's not me. What a genius. So when they saw the full seal, they said that, nah, we don't believe that. This cannot be him. Something's wrong. Then then Mansur eventually had to reconquer them, and it leads to the whole thing, which he manages to eventually. But this was this individual who was a nobody, yet such a powerful figure. And you can see here these poems as well, that that some people obviously addressing Mansur, that زعمت أن الدين لا يقتضي فاستوفي بالكيل أبا مجرمي سقيت كأسا كنت تسقي بها أمر في الحلق من العلقم. That you see, Mansur, to justify it to the people, because people did love Abu Muslim, he justified it with this speech of his, and you can see it's here as well. I've put it here. He says that منصور خطب في الناس بعد قتل أبي مسلم فقال أيها الناس لا, he says لا تنفروا أطيار النعم بترك الشكر, and he tells them, look, don't be ungrateful, فتحل بكم النقم, that lest you too fall victim to consequences. And he mentions that, look, he goes on to say that that we basically ruled with a law, that he says, look, ما ذكرتم فضل ومن نازعنا هذا القميص أوطعنا رأسه. That he mentions that we had this rule amongst us, the Abbasids, that any uprising would be crushed. And Abu Muslim pledged his allegiance with this law. And it is by that law that he got executed, that those who live by the sword die by the sword. And he had promised that whoever rises against the ruler deserves to be executed. So this was his speech to people, Mansur's. But in it, you saw, and you can see there that, look, I put a poem of Firaq Gorakhpuri ke maut ka bhi ilaj ho shayad, zindagi ka koi ilaj nahi. Allah, that maut ka bhi ilaj ho shayad, that maybe death actually has a cure itself, but life, there is no cure to life. Zindagi ka koi ilaj nahi. People, I want to share that story with us, the vicissitudes. Now, whether you see that as a celebration or a travesty, it is a matter of perspective. On one hand, this person conquered what nobody before him could have. He achieved what they couldn't have achieved. But then, on the other hand, he, met his tragedy awaiting him. As it's been said, that we often meet our fate on the path we take to avoid it. Allah. وتلك الأيام نداولها بيننا.